Welcome to another episode of the Bible Toolbox. I'm Lydia.
And I'm Luke, and we are here to help you enjoy the Bible through the tools that scholars and programmers have created for you.
All right, what's our tool today?
Our tool today is Bible translations. Unless you are fluent in ancient Greek and Hebrew, you will need a translation.
All right, I need a translation. He might not. I do.
I still need translations. So we are going to talk about, there are thousands of translations.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about why they are different and why we have so many and which ones to use and how to use them and when to use them and why to use them and so on.
Very good to know.
So first, let's talk about why they don't differ.
Okay.
the reason they do not differ.
Okay.
So here's kind of an example that you'll see on the internet in places.
Mm-hmm.
So here it says like the NIV and the ESV have now removed 45 complete verses. And, they give examples here of, salvation of, for the Son of Man is come to save that which is lost and such. Like there's verses that they're taking out. They're stealing our salvation. Okay. What is this assuming? What kind of intentions is it assuming that the modern translators have?
It seems like they're putting like evil thoughts into the translators' minds and they have bad intentions and they're trying to sway the reader by taking out certain verses and not putting in and putting in other ones that get their message across more.
Right. Which is not true.
Not true.
I mean, you can go and read the preface of the ESV, the NIV, the NASB, whatever. That's not what they're trying to do. These are Christians on committees trying to bring us to salvation in Christ through their translation.
Okay, so why do they differ then?
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So this is an example of differing manuscripts.
Okay.
Okay, and this is called textual criticism.
Okay, so
this is not critically looking at the text like, oh, let's
criticizing it. Yeah, okay.
It's not criticizing the Bible. It's looking at the different texts, the manuscripts that we have, and critically weighing what is the original.
Okay.
So the reason we have to do this, so a little history here, the Old Testament was written in Hebrew mainly.
Yes. Okay.
But eventually Hebrew just over time wasn't the language of the people anymore. Just kind of think how English has developed over time.
Sure.
Just over time, languages die out.
Okay.
So Hebrew was no longer spoken by common people. So it was eventually translated into Greek.
Okay.
In about 200 BC or so. And this is what we call the Septuagint.
The Septuagint is the Old Testament translated into Greek?
Yes.
Okay.
It's translated from the Hebrew into Greek. And LXX is the symbol that's used for the Septuagint.
Okay. Sounds good.
The New Testament was also, or Greek remained to be the common language during that time. So the New Testament was actually all done in Greek as well.
Okay. So then we had a complete Greek Old Testament and New Testament.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And then eventually, in some parts of, so the Roman Empire continues, the Eastern Empire stays Greek, where the Western was Latin. Okay. So eventually Greek falls out in the West, and so we need another translation. And so a guy named Jerome was commissioned to make a translation into Latin, or to make a standard translation. There were already translations in Latin, but he kind of like compiled them and made like the standard that the church would use. And that's what we call the Vulgate. Okay.
So we have manuscripts of the Old Testament in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin.
Yep.
And the New Testament in Greek and Latin.
Yep. And so Latin isn't the only language that it was like Christians went to.
Right.
Right. I mean, Christians were going across the whole world. So we actually have translations into tons of ancient languages.
Great. That's good news.
Yeah, that is good news. Like early on, even all the way into China is like the Christian movement went into. So like it expanded across the world.
Awesome.
And that is good news. In the West, where they were speaking Latin, they were kind of like forgetting the Greek sometimes. And so there was a movement in the 1500s, and Erasmus was part of this, where they were trying to go back to the original Greek.
Okay.
So Erasmus collects the manuscripts of Greek that he had, the best ones that he had, and they were good. And he found roughly 7.
Okay.
And compiled an edition comparing these manuscripts and coming with what he thinks is the original of the New Testament.
In Greek.
In Greek.
Okay.
And that's what we call the Textus Receptus, or this is Latin for received text.
So the Textus Receptus is going back to the Greek, taking the remains of the manuscripts of the Greek, putting them back together, saying this is what it was.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. Well, and they were full manuscripts of the New Testament.
Okay.
And you have to compare the differences.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And so he compared the differences and was trying to figure out which one was the earliest, which were the best readings of the original.
Okay.
Okay. Later on, there were other scholars. So Stephanus and Beza built off of Erasmus, and they had more manuscripts at their disposal.
Okay.
And so they had somewhere up to 25 probably.
Okay.
And they made additions and edits to his work.
Sure.
And but it's kind of in the same line there.
Is that still called the Textus Receptus?
It is still. So there's multiple editions of the Textus Receptus.
Got it.
Okay. But they're all part of that family. So we just call that the Textus Receptus. And then, okay, so this is what the Textus Receptus is, what the King James Bible was translated from. So this is 1500s.
Yep.
King James translation was made in 1611.
Okay, so they would have only had the Textus Receptus to work off of.
That was the best version of the New Testament
and
that they had.
rightfully so.
Rightfully so.
Yeah.
Yes. After that, around the 1700s and later, there was tons of archaeology done.
Okay.
And where they had 25 manuscripts, we have over 5,000.
Oh, wow. How cool would it be to just be digging around and, you find, there's some Romans or something. Like, so cool.
And so one of these is in 1849, a guy named Tischendorf, who is the inspiration for Indiana Jones.
Nice.
Found Sinaiticus, which is pretty much the oldest complete manuscript that we have of the Septuagint and the New Testament.
Oh, really? So
it's
old and
massive,
new, all in Greek.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome.
It's not all of it, but it's like the most complete.
That's so cool.
Most of it. And then continuing on, 1950s, the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. Because up until this time, the oldest Hebrew text that they had was around 1000 AD.
Oh, so like the Old Testament, but not written after Jesus.
Right, way after.
Way after Jesus.
1000 AD.
Okay.
And so the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in Qumran, and it was texts in Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic.
Oh, cool. Around
the time 250 BC and 70 AD. And they kind of help confirm that the Hebrew texts that we have are not way off. Like they're pretty similar.
Was the Dead Sea Scrolls only, did you say only Hebrew? Only Old Testament?
Well, it's during this period. So anything this period and before.
Gotcha. Okay.
But Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic, the multiple languages during whatever languages were used in Palestine and Qumran during that time.
But I bet that opened up so many more doors for manuscript
So now we have to compare, and just like today, it wasn't just copies of the Bible. It's also interpretations. It's commentaries. It's paraphrases. It's like there's just a massive amount of literature now that is thrown in and has to be interpreted and studied.
So you said that there's 5,000-ish today. Is that like split between old and new, or are there more new, or are there more Old Testament manuscripts? That's only New Testament.
Yep.
So why are there so many more New Testament manuscripts than there are Old Testament manuscripts?
Yep. So that's especially true before the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls open that up. But in general, I think it comes down to a difference in how they were preserved. So we see this in the Old Testament where God has a specific people, Israel, that he is working his salvation plan through. And so he's working with a nation and it's more controlled. So here we can kind of see where Josiah, he finds the book of the law in the temple of the Lord.
Oh, right. There's one book of the law and it was in the temple. It was kept in the temple.
Yeah. Or like the standard version was there in the temple. Where the New Testament, there's no more temple. There's no more Israel. It's the salvation is extended. The covenant people is extended to the Gentiles. And this is kind of the drive behind the New Testament where we have, Jesus commanding us to go into the whole world, preach the gospel to every creature. So like here, Paul says, after this letter has been read to you, see that it is also read in the church of the Laodiceans. Okay. And so there's this like trading, you'd copy your letter and then send it to another church and then they'd send their letter back. And, there's a lot of movement and trading around and it was just trying to get the word out. Jesus is Lord. He's
so
risen from the dead. Yeah.
It's like proof that the Christian church was just like exploding everywhere.
Yeah. And so that's why we have such a diversity and explosion of manuscripts in the New Testament.
But with tons of manuscripts come tons of like spelling errors or missed lines or that kind of thing, because they weren't worried, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, they weren't worried about exact precision of every spelling. They're just trying to get it out as fast as possible, which they weren't being careless, I'm sure. Either,
well, they were worried about spelling, but it's just you make mistakes.
Okay.
As you're writing, you're gonna put, like, we do this all the time with typos and like there versus there.
Sure.
T-H-E-I-R versus T-H-E-R-E.
Yeah.
I still make those mistakes. And I know the exact difference, but it's just the way you say it in your mind, the way you write it down, you just make mistakes.
Okay.
Okay.
So going back to that Facebook post, like, is this a concern that there's verses missing? Even like we know there's so many different manuscripts, but are they like that different? We should be concerned.
All right, let's check it out. So looking back here at Matthew 17, like we showed, ESV and the NET don't have the verse.
Okay, so Matthew 17:21 is indeed not in the ESV and the NET.
Right.
Okay.
But they have footnotes here, so you can hover over and see in the corner here. It tells you the reason for taking it out, right?
Okay.
Some manuscripts insert verse 21, and then they give you a translation, but this kind never comes out except by prayer and fasting. So they include it there, but they let you know there's manuscripts that the best manuscripts in their opinion don't have it.
So the KJV Textus Receptus included this verse, but then when we discovered all the 5,000 or whatever more that show that this verse wasn't included in the more reliable ones, so that they didn't, when they were translating and they were comparing manuscripts, they decided to not put it in because the manuscripts didn't have it. Not all of them had it.
Yep. The oldest and best ones that they could find didn't have it.
So there's no like evil intentions. It's just an honest look at the text. What is there, what is not. Even if it's different from before, we have to be honest with it now.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the NET actually has really long footnotes that spell that out. So here, their footnote is a lot longer.
Wow, that's really long.
Yeah, and they even tell you many important manuscripts, and they actually list them out. These are symbols for different manuscripts.
Okay.
And I mean, you can go and look them up on books and Wikipedia and whatever, but most people don't want to do that. And then they give you a whole explanation for why they feel like it shouldn't be in the text.
That's a really good resource to know, the NET for footnotes. Is this common for like a lot of verses in the New Testament and Old Testament that NET would have footnotes for?
Oh, NET has footnotes Genesis to Revelation.
Oh, okay.
On these issues. So you can use those footnotes. Another easy way to compare is using the kjvparallelbible.org.
Okay.
And what this does is it puts the Textus Receptus, what the King James is translated, and the critical text, which is the modern, after looking at the 5,000 manuscripts and Dead Sea Scrolls and stuff. Or I mean, this isn't Dead Sea Scrolls because this is just New Testament.
Okay.
But you can actually scroll and it highlights where they differ.
Oh, so like 1 through 3, there's no difference.
There's no difference at all.
Versus the manuscripts.
Yep.
Okay.
And we get our first difference here in verse 4. Peter says, "Let us make here 3 tabernacles." Verse, "I will make thee 3 tabernacles."
Oh, so like not a significant difference.
Plural versus singular.
Okay.
And you come here, touch them, and verse touching them.
Okay.
Right. So most of these differences are very, very minor.
Okay.
So the first big difference, so I mean, even here we get, "and Jesus answered," verse, "and he answered." You'll see that one a lot.
Okay.
Just clarifying who is this pronoun talking about. And then "said unto them," but you already know they're talking to them, right?
Sure.
So you'll see mistakes like that. No mistakes, no differences for many verses there. And then we get, the verse.
21.
21. Okay. But as you can see, like there's really not much different. And you can go and click through. There are some major questions, and you can find those online and such. But you can scroll through this website and
for any chapter, any book,
any chapter for the New Testament, and you can see. And even for the big ones, so like John 7. So that they are aware of the major differences here. They're not trying to hide them from you.
Okay.
So you can scroll through the same thing. Like there's these little minor differences that you can compare. And then
John 7 is which story is that?
it's the adulterous woman.
That's what it was.
And where Jesus says, he who is without sin cast the first stone. So it's, if you come here, it's right here, John 7:53 to 8:11. And they tell you, here's the TR viewpoint, here's the CT, the critical text viewpoint.
So the story of the adulterous woman is included in the Textus Receptus, but it's
Mhm.
not included in the critical text.
Right.
The whole story is missing.
Yep.
Okay. And they tell you why.
And they tell you why here.
Okay. So there are resources to look into bigger
Yep.
chunks.
Yep.
Okay.
So this would be the place to start to look into that.
Yeah, but it does look like our Bible is reliable.
Yeah.
Like just scrolling through, I don't see like tons of huge differences that are going to change our theology or doctrine or anything like that. Is that like widely accepted?
Yeah.
That the Bible is true?
Yeah. So coming back to our PowerPoint here, Bart Airman, who's an agnostic Bible scholar.
So not a Christian.
Not a Christian. So he has no reason to believe in the authority of the Bible or the preservation of God with the Bible. But he deals with textual manuscripts a lot. And he says, after reviewing a new update edition of the Greek New Testament, he says, the reality is that we are unlikely to discover radically new problems or devise radically new solutions. At this stage, our work on the original text, what the original authors wrote, amounts to little more than tinkering.
Oh, okay.
And we kind of saw that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just words and phrases that aren't making too big of a difference for the most part.
Sure. That's awesome. So we have a very reliable text.
Yeah.
With lots of manuscripts to back it up.
Yep.
Okay. So are manuscripts then the main difference between why translations differ?
No, I would say that's fairly minor.
Okay.
That's like 4% of the differences.
Oh, wow.
Maybe.
Okay.
The main difference between manuscripts is in what is called translation philosophy. And this is translation committees just have different goals with what they want their translation to accomplish.
Okay. What are some examples of these goals?
Yeah. So let's look at Psalm 1. So here we have Psalm 1:1 in 3 different translations, and let's just read them here. So this is the Young's literal translation. It says, "Oh, the happiness of that one who hath not walked in the counsel of the wicked, and in the way of sinners hath not stood, and in the seat of scorners hath not sat."
Okay. Interesting.
Does that sound like a translation you want to read?
Not quite, but maybe it has some promises, maybe.
Yeah. Well, this is very rigid to the Hebrew.
Okay.
This is, notice how in the way of the sinners hath not stood.
Yeah.
Right. He puts the phrase there even before the verb, and that's not how we talk in English.
Right.
But he did that because that's what it is in the Hebrew.
Of the
So
Hebrew
he tried
the phrase before. Okay.
Yeah. So he tried to be very, very literal to the text.
Okay. What
Okay.
about KJV?
King James, let's read this. So it says, "Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful."
So much
So
better
much.
to my ear.
Yeah, it flows a lot better, but it is still very word to word.
Yep.
It moves some of the, like here, nor standeth, puts that first, and then puts in the way of sinners after, because that's more natural English.
But it keeps in the way of sinners together.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. It's still the same words,
Just in a different order.
just in a different order.
Okay.
Whereas, let's look at the NIV. It says, "Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers."
The same
very
meaning.
similar. But you can notice a few, like it adds "take" in there, where that's not there, but they're trying to just clarify, like, you're not just not hanging out with sinners or with people. It's you're not going in their path. You're not following their same lifestyle.
Okay.
Right. And so they're trying to like clarify the meaning here.
Okay.
Okay. So this highlights, we're going to use this example to highlight the different philosophies here. So the first one to point out here is it kind of came up, word for word versus thought for thought. The Young's literal translation is very word for word.
When you say word for word, you mean the translators went to the Hebrew and they said, okay, this word in English means happiness. And so they put happiness in the exact place it was in the Hebrew. And they didn't change anything else.
Right.
Okay.
As much as possible.
So it would be Young's, which is very, very word for word.
And Young's even tried to keep the word order like we saw. Yeah.
But King James still did word for word, but they maneuvered the words around just so we could understand them and be more fluent in English.
Yeah, it's a lot more fluid.
Okay. So how is the NIV also word for word?
No, it's still trying to get the same text as much as possible, but it's more down the continuum of word for word towards meaning for meaning. It's trying to get the same meaning that was there in the Hebrew to the meaning that it is in English, like we were talking about in the way that sinners take. It's taking the meaning that was intended in the Hebrew and making it more understandable to us English people.
Sure. And do they still use as many of the original words as possible? But they just have possible. A little bit more freedom if they need to maybe add a couple words or change one or so. Okay.
Because they're trying to preserve meaning, the same meaning.
Okay.
Where Young is trying to preserve the same words.
Sure. Okay. So you said there's a continuum here?
Yeah.
So formal was word for word, functional was meaning for meaning or thought for thought.
Yep.
Okay.
So you can find charts online in books all over. They're all pretty much the same. So you can see like here's one from Fee and Strauss that puts a number of translations on a spectrum. So you can see here NASB, King James over here on formal. Here's one that I made. So I put like, you have Young's literal, which is way over here. King James, New King James, ESV, NRSV, are all pretty similar in what I'm calling essentially literal, where NIV is more over here on functional. It's easier to read.
Got it. So
but there are ones that are easier to read than the NIV. And there are ones that are more literal than the King James.
Sure.
But it's a spectrum.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. So we have form, word for word, or meaning for meaning. Got it.
So the reason why we would do meaning for meaning is because of your audience.
Okay.
Okay.
Like so who's reading the text?
Who's reading it? So the NIV is written for a certain group of people. It's trying to make the text more understandable for a lower reading level and for maybe people who aren't familiar with Christian terms like justification, propitiation, sanctification. Like those words are difficult to understand if you're just opening up the Bible.
Interesting. So they have a target audience as they're translating the Bible.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. They do. So here's an example. This is from christianbook.com of the different reading levels of the Bible translations. So you can see like the NIRV is written for third graders.
Oh, okay. So if you had a child, I mean, even like NLT or sixth grade.
Yeah.
Okay. To kind of gauge where their understanding level is. And okay, very cool.
Yeah. Where like King James, 12th grade. Yeah. I mean, this is high school.
Yeah.
ESV is also high up there. NIV is still 8th grade.
Sure.
Like those are more difficult, but they have a certain audience that they're trying to gauge to so that they can understand the word.
Okay, awesome.
Another thing that we can notice here in the Psalm 1 is right at the beginning here. Blessed is the man versus blessed is the one.
So they're trying to be a little more gender inclusive here. NIV is.
Yep. So the text actually says man. It does. It says man, and that's why the King James put it as man. But when the King James did that, they didn't mean women are not blessed.
Not blessed.
Right. And so the NIV just wanted to clarify that.
Sure.
We understand this is an inclusive word.
Okay.
Women are also included in this. So they try to use a word that's more neutral.
Got it.
Between man and woman.
Makes sense.
Another goal is style. And you can actually hear it in the King James. So, or in the Young's literal, and in the way of sinners hath not stood, and in the seat of scorners hath not sat. Just does not flow.
Doesn't flow.
This would be awful to memorize.
It kind of sounds like Dr. Seuss, honestly.
Well, Dr. Seuss flows really well. This is more, it's just very staccato-y.
Yes.
Where the King James really flows, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful.
Yeah, it does flow very well.
Okay. Where the NIV Well, okay, that was a big part of the King James, is they read the text aloud
Oh,
and made sure
yeah.
it flowed really well
Mhm.
when it was read aloud. Where the NIV isn't concerned as much with style as it is with readability, understandability.
Mhm.
So here it doesn't flow quite as well, or in the way that sinners take, or in the company of mockers. Like it has that sinners take. It still has that kind of staccato-y.
Sure. They just weren't as concerned, and their style was just different.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have form, audience, gender words, style.
Yep. And so there are a couple other they're more minor reasons, different philosophy
Okay.
goals. And we're going to look at those. So one is tradition. So we can see this in the Lord's Prayer,
Okay.
where the King James tradition is,
I mean, it was so old. You can't,
Yeah.
like, everyone knows the
Our
King
Father
James.
who art in heaven,
Hallowed be thy name. Yeah.
Right. Where, so the NRSV, NASB, NIV, ESV all use hallowed be your name, even though we don't really talk like that in normal prayers.
Mm-hmm.
So the NLT and NET weren't as concerned with following that tradition, where they translated it as they think it should be translated.
Sure.
May your name be kept holy. May your name be kept honored, or be honored.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that just shows which translations are more bound to the tradition and which are not.
Okay. So another reason they would differ is just tradition. Do they want to hold to it or not?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And another one is what to do with ancient terms and metaphors and such. So, for example, Goliath was 6 cubits in a span. How tall is that?
Or like,
Yeah, we don't know. So the NLT, NET, again, make it into English.
Yeah.
Over 9 feet tall, and the NET says over or close to 7 feet tall.
Ooh, is that a manuscript
And
difference?
there's a manuscript
there?
difference,
Ooh.
textual criticism.
But the ESV, NIV, they put footnotes in. So
Yeah.
they would put...
So they have 6 cubits in a span because that's what the text says. They're trying to be formal, and then they'll put a footnote saying this is 9 feet tall.
Got it.
Whatever.
Okay. Nice.
Another one is metaphors. So, for example, in the Song of Solomon, the King James and other formal translations will read, "Thy hair is as a flock of goats."
Honey, if you ever told me that, I don't know what I would do.
Yeah. So the NLT tries to clarify what it meant in Hebrew, and they say, "Your hair falls in waves like a flock of goats winding down the slopes of Gilead."
Much smoother.
Right. And it's more understandable in English.
Awesome.
Okay. So those are all of kind of, not all. There are many more kind of little things here, but those are kind of the major philosophical goal differences that a translation committee has.
Okay.
Who they're trying to reach and how they're trying to do their translation.
Okay. So we have manuscripts and then we have goals.
Mm-hmm.
You said there's one more?
There's one more. So this is the one that's the scariest, but there are times where the interpretation of the committee comes out. It's different.
Just like their understanding of the text is different.
Yep. Sometimes this has nothing to do with theology.
Okay.
For example, James 4:5. You have the ESV that reads, "He yearns jealously over the Spirit that he has made to dwell in us." Okay, notice how the Spirit is being yearned for. He's yearning for the Spirit.
Okay.
Where the New King James reads, "The Spirit who dwells in us yearns jealously."
Oh, so the Spirit is the one yearning.
The Spirit is the one yearning, where up here the Spirit is what is yearned for.
Okay, so why this difference?
The difference is in the Greek, the form of it can either be the subject or the object of the verb.
Oh, so it's just ambiguous.
It's just ambiguous, and you have to translate it somehow. So you pick one.
Okay.
ESV is convinced that it should be that way. The New King James is convinced it should be that way.
Okay.
Is that going to change your theology? No. But these happen throughout the text.
Just with Greek words that could mean the same thing or anything like that.
Yep.
Okay.
There are a few where theology does come out. So here's an example where in the King James it says, this is talking about Jesus' teaching on divorce.
Okay.
He says, "Whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery." So this word fornication is a very common in ancient English. This was a common word just for sexual sin.
Okay.
Sexual immorality.
Mm-hmm.
The NAB, which is a Catholic translation.
Okay.
Okay. So Catholics don't believe that you can be divorced.
Okay.
And so the way that they interpret this is, "I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, unless the marriage is unlawful." Okay. So they interpret this idea of sexual immorality, fornication, as the marriage itself was not lawful to stand. It's like if I got married to a dog, that's not lawful.
Okay.
Right. So
Interesting.
it was never a legit marriage to start. Okay.
And their theology definitely swayed that interpretation.
Yeah, for sure.
Of one word.
Okay. And the word itself is ambiguous.
Oh, okay. So they had to translate this.
So you have to interpret it somehow.
Interpret it a certain way.
Another one is 1 Timothy 3:11. This is talking about the qualifications for elders and deacons. And in the deacons paragraph, it says, and the gine. It uses the Greek word for woman, which is the same word as for wife.
Ooh, okay.
So they didn't have a way of distinguishing those.
Yep.
And so this is a big deal. Can women be deacons or not? ESV King James translates it as wives, which would seem to at least help towards saying no, women are not deacons. This is the wives of the deacons.
Interesting.
Where NASB and NRSV say women, meaning you have the men deacons, and now let's talk about the women deacons, right?
And I'm sure this decision to make this word was researched, and
there's
other
so much research.
texts were pulled in. Like, it wasn't just like, books. No, we think it's women, we're gonna put this. Like, they have to research it because they're making a translation.
Yeah, we don't have the time to go through all the research behind it.
Okay.
Because there are women deaconesses early on in the church, and all those debates and stuff.
Yeah.
So
we'll let that be. Yeah. But just to clarify, like, it wasn't them just trying to make a point.
Yeah.
Like, it was.
It's an honest ambiguity in the text that you have to make a decision, and they're trying to be as faithful as possible to what it meant.
Okay.
But here's kind of my digression, is that you can't put that much theology in the text. Like I was kind of saying before, even if you translate that as wives, you could argue other places in the Bible to argue for women deacons. That's not the only place.
You can't change the whole Bible.
Right. You can't change the entire Bible. You can't change history. You can't change manuscripts. You can't.
Sure.
Right. And so an example here, the New World Translation, which is the Jehovah Witnesses Bible.
Which they believe Jesus is not God.
They believe he's not one with the Father. Right.
Okay.
And so you can see that in John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God. Right. So not capital G like we're used to seeing in our Bibles. But so they can put their theology there. Their theology shows up there.
But is that a real reasonable translation of the Greek?
It's a possibility. Yeah.
Okay. They weren't just like making it up.
Yeah. There's a Christian who made kind of a scholar who made his own translation of the Bible. He's a Greek Orthodox Christian who also translates it as a God.
Oh, but he's Christian. Okay.
And he understands it in a different way.
Okay.
He understands it in a more Orthodox way that we would understand it. However, when the New World Translation comes to John 20:28, there's not really a way around it. This is where Jesus shows Thomas the nails in his hand and says, "Come touch." And Thomas looks at it and he says, "In answer, Thomas said to him, 'My Lord and my God.'"
Oh.
Yeah.
How did they get around that one?
Yeah. So they can't just change the text. Jehovah Witnesses are also bound to the text. They're trying to honor and obey what the text says. So they're not just going to change the text. So they have to reinterpret this verse.
Oh.
So they would say, like, "You, Jesus, are my Lord, and Father, you're my God," or something like that. Okay. Like a change in perspective, or I'm sure there's other interpretations as well.
But their text is the same as
the text is the same.
Okay.
So only so much theology can go into changing the text.
Well, which is very comforting. Like we can trust their translations that they haven't been put in a certain way or catered to a certain perspective.
And if you were reading the New World Translation, let's say, and you come across John 1:1 and you read "was a God," and let's say you were reading it along with another translation and it has capital G God, then it's like, oh, and then that kind of like springboards you to go and look into it, right? And so this is kind of the importance of comparing different translations. And you can see where some of these ambiguities are and maybe where theology is put in and, where these decisions are made by the committees.
Yeah, we'll have to explain some more tools in future episodes, hint, hint, of how to look up these differences.
Yeah. So, summary.
Alrighty. So different manuscripts, different goals, like word for word, thought for thought. Who are they writing to? Are they trying to flow or not? Ancient terms, those kinds of things.
Yep.
And then there are points where the text is ambiguous. You could go either way. And so they, with research and prayer, I'm sure lots of prayer,
Oh, yeah.
They make a choice and go with it. Okay.
Yep. So, which translation is best?
Tell us.
Well, it depends.
Oh, okay. That's
right?
probably
Just
good.
like there are different goals for translations. Depending on your goal, it can be different. So here, and in general, I think it's best to use multiple. As you're doing your interpretation and study, to use multiple to see these ambiguities, to see the differences, to see maybe where manuscripts are different. So you can look at the King James and see the Textus Receptus, and New King James also uses the Textus Receptus. The NRSV, I really like the NRSV because it includes the Apocrypha.
What's the Apocrypha?
That's the books that are in, you'll see it in Catholic and Eastern Orthodox Bibles, but they're not in Protestant ones.
Interesting.
And maybe we'll talk about that debate at some time. But they have a translation of that. There's also a King James translation of the Apocrypha as well.
Okay.
But
anyway,
the NET we saw,
That was
tons
the
of footnotes.
Okay.
Footnotes are so good in the NET. They point out translation difficulties, textual criticism stuff, and even just whatever. They have lots of
If you
things.
ever have a question, a good place to go is the NET.
Yeah.
That's probably just online then to see all the footnotes.
It's online pretty much at every website where you find a Bible.
Good to know.
Yep. And then we saw like the NLT is written for a 6th grade reading level and just very easy to understand.
Okay.
If you need a starting point into the Bible.
All right. Awesome. Well, this has been so enlightening just to know why there are different translations and to not have evil intentions towards the translators and just to trust the word of God, because how amazing is it that he's preserved it from time of Moses and Adam, like all the way so we can read it now. Yeah.
And the fact that we have thousands of translations in English is such a blessing, because there are still tons of people who don't have a single translation in their language. So take advantage of these tools that we have, use multiple translations, and help understand the text that God has given to us.
Awesome. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Bible Toolbox. For more information and resources about the content covered in this episode, visit our website. If you have a Bible tool that you'd like us to discuss, leave a comment on our YouTube page or email us at thebiblettoolbox@gmail.com.